Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by Mr. Sholan Booysen. Sholan, how are you doing, man?
Hey Nick, I'm doing good. Always excited to be on the Daily Feed Show, and looking forward to our discussion.
Excellent. And of course, Mr. Marius Roodt, who's still in London. Marius, when are you going to be coming back? I saw some people asking in the chat about that last time you were on.
Beginning of September, I'll be back in the Republic, back in
Ah.
God's own country, not South Africa, but
Indeed.
the East Rand.
A big if true, as they say. And I just want to remind everyone that if you are interested in having the IRR speak to your community, you can send an email to sairrevents@gmail.com. We're interested in visiting communities all around the country, particularly those outside of, Gauteng and the kind of Cape Town area. So especially if you live in those areas, but if you live anywhere and you want us to come speak to your community, maybe talk about some of the issues in the country, please do pop us an email to that address. All right, let us get into the news. And this is a story actually, Sholan, that you sent me, but I'd also seen some chatter about it. And it happened, well, I guess technically today, and that is an altercation in the Johannesburg City Council. So ever since 2016, when the ANC lost its majority in the Johannesburg City Council, there have been, shall we say, quite a lot of contentious council meetings in the Joburg City Council. In the brief time that I was a councillor, there was some serious altercations. I narrowly avoided being in fights at some point, and in fact, I was placed, I think, on the board of between the EFF and the DA at the time because I'm sort of rather large, and so I think the DA thought I'd be a good human shield. But so there's been quite a lot of contention in these council meetings. Many meetings have gone late. Many of them have collapsed due to parties walking out or refusing to participate. Votes of no confidence have not been terribly uncommon, but it seems to have reached a new height in the early hours of this morning. The council meeting had been due to various delays, mostly, I believe, by the EFF and ANC members of the council, and a very full agenda was still ongoing at 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, council meetings typically start about 10 a.m., so to have it go until 1 o'clock in the morning, you get a sense of how long, how much stress that must involve. And apparently, the ANC and EFF objected to someone who was in the audience and said that he should not be able to view the council proceedings. There were lots of points of order raised on this issue, and EFF speakers said that they would not allow the meeting to go forward unless this issue was addressed. The speaker said the issue has been addressed. The speaker's the DA's councillor Vasco da Gama was elected by the coalition. He said, no, this issue is dealt with. Please, can we finish with the agenda? It was toing and froing back and forth. I'm sure if you've watched the national parliament when the EFF raises lots of points of informational objection, it's a very similar kind of thing. But according to some DA councillors, some in the EFF then started saying, well, if you're not going to let us speak, then we're going to remove you from that chair as speaker. And they didn't mean through a vote of no confidence. They meant physically remove. And so a fight appears to have broken out between opposition council, the sort of DA and coalition councillors and the EFF ANC councillors, as they try to physically drag Vasco da Gama from his chair in the speakership. And there's some video of it that you can go and check out online, which is doing the rounds. Of course, this is seen many accusations from both sides. The EFF talked about how, the DA talked about how some of their female councillors have been attacked, and this was outrageous, particularly in Women's Month. The EFF and ANC said that the ANC said specifically the stifling of debate and impartial, arrogant posture of the Speaker of Council towards a fair and open debate is what caused Council to collapse. So, some pretty intense stuff. Sholan, what do you make of all this? I mean, is this perhaps a portent of what Parliament might look like in 2024?
Yeah, man. Firstly, this is certainly on brand for the EFF type. I definitely think the only objective at this point is not even to be elected, but essentially just to disrupt and cause chaos. Unfortunately, I hope that this does not continue, especially now National Assembly, because I think it causes a lot of like disenchantment, especially for youth, for people, investors from overseas who look at this and are like, what chaos and volatility is this happening in this country? Like it's a risk that we can't take, and that's exactly how investors do think. And especially for youth, also, I'm just thinking, yeah, there's no dignity or any form of proper leadership being portrayed in this instance in the council, where I mean they were literally fighting, shoving, people are swearing at each other. That it got pretty heated, I think. But I also think at the same time that this is once again another indication that, like the battle that we all engage in for South Africa is solely essentially it's reaching a boiling point, and it's more important to be engaged when we see things like this occurring, now more than ever before, because we definitely need to look at these people who are the instigators and be like, nah, you guys do not deserve my vote to sit in that council, and make decisions for my city or for my community. And that's why we need to definitely be careful when we vote, for who we vote. And that's definitely an important takeaway from this, Nick.
So I agree with you completely on that one. But as for the sort of the political aspect of this, right? So putting aside the the morality of it, it does seem to me, Marius, that the sort of inner workings of the legislatures, of parliament, of the city councils, of the provincial legislatures is going to become ever more important, because the moment you have to build a coalition to pass legislation, or if the biggest party has a tiny minority, the opportunities for delaying legislation, getting legislation changed, making a show of opposing certain legislation, collapsing council meetings, collapsing parliamentary meetings. It seems like the opportunities that can be gained from that are much higher. So your thoughts on this issue and whether we're going to see more of it?
Just to start off by saying, somebody made a comment in the chat about how old is Vasco da Gama? He arrived in South Africa in 1498 or something. So that is a good point. I don't think it's the same Vasco da Gama, but perhaps also that's why the EFF has got such a hatred for Mr. da Gama, because he's got the same name as the first European to make it around South Africa by an ocean-going vessel, I believe. So, but I think you're exactly spot on. That's one thing I've been thinking about when the ANC eventually does lose its national majority and gets forced into opposition. I actually think that there's probably a good chance that the ANC will accept its loss in fairly good grace and, vacate the union buildings and so on. But I think they'll be very disruptive in as an opposition political party. And there's going to be a lot of interesting things that happen. So once the ANC, let's say for argument's sake, it gets to about 40% and opposition coalition comes in, takes over. But at the same time, the ANC is probably going to be the single biggest party in 5 or 6 provinces, even if it loses a national majority. So that means they're going to control the National Council of Provinces, even if they've lost the control of the National Assembly. And the NCOP, while it's obviously not as an important entity as the National Assembly, it can still, a lot of legislation still has to go through it. It can still block a lot of legislation. So that's, and that they could be stalling, just using not even, violence or being, doing silly things, just through using normal constitutional, the way that our constitution and the country's been set up. So, but I do think we will see, if the ANC ever does lose power, I do think we'll see this kind of thing. And it's going to be a problem when we do have a coalition that's, like made up of 6 or 7 parties or maybe more, or a minority government that's reliant on the votes of a small party to pass budgets and pass certain laws and what have you. So I think we're going to get to a situation soon where I think the National Assembly is going to look what the Joburg City Council looks like in terms of party support, where the ANC is about a 30% party, DA is about a 20% party. We'll have somebody like Action SA 15%, EFF 10%, and then what our former boss, or the Dr. Frans Cronje, called the rats and mouse party. So people with 1 or 2% and a handful of seats, but they'll be elevated to quite important positions because they'll have to be allowed on to pass legislation and get budgets passed. So I think we're going to see what happened in the Joburg City Council. It's going to probably become quite common to see in the National Assembly and in the various provincial legislatures. And it's as Sholan was saying. I mean, it's actually disgraceful. People can agree and should can disagree and should disagree in a democracy. Nobody has to agree on everything, but violence is hardly ever the answer, unless you in World War II and dealing with Nazis or something. But most of the time, it needs to people need to come to compromise, need to come to some kind of consensus. And just some of the videos I was watching this morning from the Joburg City Council meeting was disgraceful. People getting hit, and it was just. It's terrible, and I don't know how anybody could now look at the EFF and think this is a kind of political party I want to support and that they are, going to be good for South Africa in the long run.
So I think what I'm kind of taking away from all this is that all political parties in Parliament, up till now, Parliament is a place where people go to sleep because you have long, very badly practiced delivered speeches, usually from ANC politicians. And then you have the occasional sort of fiery Marxist one from the EFF, and then you have a sort of, DA centrist one. And it's got a very predictable rhythm to it. And I suspect that that's going to be very much disruptive. And we're going to see a parliament that looks a lot like the UK parliament in terms of the sort of energy that you see there. Maybe perhaps not quite as civil, but certainly a lot of toing and froing. And the feeling I get from that is that all political parties are going to have to get a lot, for want of a better word, cleverer when it comes to politics. Politics is not just going to be something that happens out there in the media. All of your elected representatives are going to have to be pretty sharp, pretty on their feet, and know how to deal with the cut and thrust of the legislatures. Sholan, final thoughts? Do you agree with my final sentiment on that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that's accurate, Nick. I will say that I do think that there is still an opportunity in this to actually make use of this newfound energy in our politics to make that vibrancy an attractive selling point for people to actually be involved. Because I do think that we can't afford just sitting on the sideline and be like, violence bad, like they are terrible. We actually need to give the alternative and be like, no, this engaging multi-party democracy is what we should be striving for. Where anybody's able to be the kingmaker and not just one dominant party chilling in Pretoria making all of the decisions for everyone. So I do think we should definitely be making use of our platforms in the RR, in the Daily Friend, other civil society organizations, the Freedom Advocacy Network, to actually encourage us more vibrancy in our assemblies, within the National Assembly or even in our councils, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
One point I want to make that I think coalition, we need to start getting used to coalition government. And something that I looked at the other day, it's actually blew my mind. The last time that a political party didn't win more than 50% of the seats in the South African Parliament was 1948, when the National Party actually had to go into coalition with a party called the Afrikaner Party to get a majority. So South Africans never been used to, we've always been used to one big dominant party, striding across our politics. But that's ending very quickly.
No, I think so. And once again, I'd encourage anyone who's listening to take an interest in your provincial legislatures and particularly in your municipal councils. Quite a lot of interesting things do happen there, although it's covered up in all sorts of bureaucratic gunk. If you can peer through that, you'll see that there's a lot of interesting politics going on, and you can get a real good sense of what all the parties and political players are doing in your council. And as Sholan said, engaging with that is really important if we want to have better outcomes. All right, let's move on to our next story, and this is about a small village in the Eastern Cape called Sibangweni, which recently has had a bit of a fracas with Eskom. So there was a power outage in this village. Eskom sent some technicians to go and repair the outage. And while there, the technicians reported to Eskom that they had detected some abnormalities, they think, with illegal connections and meters that may have been bypassed or vandalized. So Eskom sent an auditor to go check up and see which houses were potentially connecting illegally or bypassing the meter to get free electricity. And apparently, according to Eskom, one of these auditors, while after ordering a house to be disconnected, was threatened by someone with a firearm who said that you need to reconnect me or else I'm going to kill you. This has drawn quite a sharp rebuke from Eskom, who has ordered all of its employees to withdraw from the area and basically says that it will no longer be supporting the electricity grid in this area. According to them, quote, the matter has necessitated Eskom to take a decision of withdrawing its services in Sibangweni with immediate effect. Eskom will be engaging with the local municipality to find a lasting solution that will curb these seemingly increasing acts of intimidation and threats directed at Eskom employees. They also went on to talk about how they said that Eskom itself had a revenue loss of 285 million rand in the last year. Sorry, in the last 3 months, only in the Eastern Cape, due to acts of vandalism and intimidation. Marius, once again, we're seeing this sort of breakdown between, government services, which is what Eskom essentially is, and ordinary citizens, where there's just not a lot of love lost between the two. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think this is probably the right decision by Eskom. I feel a bit sorry for people who are diligent and pay their rates of taxes, or indigent and get an exemption or whatever the case is. But I think this kind of behavior is not acceptable, and I think there has to be hard sanctions for people who do this kind of thing. So there's also an issue in Khayelitsha, I think it was in the last day or two, where there was also a Eskom technician and he was fixing a transformer or something, and he was also threatened by thugs in the area. And apparently what came out was the local community came and actually protected the man while he was busy doing his work. And I think, so he could fix the problem and restore electricity. And I think that's the kind of thing we will see where communities come together. And, we can also see some, when communities come together, we see a lot of good, people stand together, but also, and that's a function of the state breaking down, which we've seen now with this community having to protect this Eskom technician. But we also see, acts of vigilante violence in a lot of places in South Africa, because people often just don't trust the police, and they'll, somebody who's accused of raping or murdering somebody, if we had a functional police force, people would probably maybe detain the guy and get the police to come arrest him. They know they could be able to rely on the criminal justice system, and the guy, if he was guilty, would be found guilty and locked away for however long. But I think a lot of people have lost so much trust in the police and the state in general that people get beaten to death and all kinds of horrible things. And, at the end of the day, that you still have to follow due process. Doesn't matter what anybody's accused of doing. An accusation doesn't make you guilty. And even if somebody did do the crime, doesn't, mean that a mob can beat them to death or, set them on fire or anything. But then, as I say, this is all a consequence of the breakdown in the state's authority in South Africa, especially with things like the police. And if I recall correctly, I think Afrobarometer, which is quite a good polling company, they do a lot of work around Africa. They are South Africans, I think, like this recent poll in the last year or so, which is the least trusted institution in South Africa. And they said the police. People even trusted political parties more than the police. So that tells you a lot about how people feel.
So my father once made the comment, and I think he's absolutely right, that it doesn't matter what problem you're looking at in South Africa. You can almost always draw at least a solid thread back to the police not working, to law and order not being kept intact by the police force. And I think here's another example. Eskom is basically having to do this thing where it's cutting off a whole community, presumably because one person or a small group of people decided to threaten a contractor. And that's probably because they don't have a lot of other options, because they know that this guy is almost certainly not going to be found by the police. He's not going to be punished, or he'll even be protected by some in his community. And so, we're left with this horrible problem where, we have to, because the basic law and order doesn't work, you have to find workarounds. In this case, it's collective punishment for a whole village. Sholan, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that this is indicative of a bigger deal, which is specifically our infrastructure, especially Eskom's infrastructure in that case. And I also think that we should take this opportunity and just highlight the fact that this is what occurs when there's too much dependency placed on a central entity that provides us with a specific thing like Eskom. And what occurs is that one issue or one failure with regard to this is one entity has an effect on an entire community. Unfortunately, that is the case. But I do think it would have been a much better situation if there were alternative sources where these community members could have received their electricity from, than only being dependent on a very failing state-owned entity like Eskom. And when a community member is, doing things like this, that is uncertain. That's certainly destructive behavior, self-destructive behavior. This is you can't excuse this type of behavior and be like, oh nah, they're stealing money in Eskom, that is bad. But I'm like, this is just as bad. Because I mean, we are always calling out the faults, always keeping accountable our leaders who commit like horrendous crimes, like corruption. But when we also need to keep our own community members accountable when the actions that they take harm the broader community. So yeah, for sure, Alex. Nicholas, I mean.
I agree with that point actually completely. And very few people are afraid to say it because they don't want to come off as elitist. They don't want to come off as a sort of scolding. They don't want to come off as, if they're a politician, they definitely don't want to, ever blame the people for anything, because that seems it's a very surefire way to lose votes. But I think you're right. It's not just top down. It's not just bottom up. You kind of have to have a little bit of both, and that also means holding to account, people around. Not with a mob, but with at least some social pressure, with some shame, with some scorn. If you're threatening someone who caught you out doing something illegal, which in this case is bypassing a meter, then this person should be exiled from their community. They should be, no one should want to look at them. No one should want to say their name, because that's just disgusting behavior. But anyway, I am struck by the feeling to me, and Marius, I want your thoughts on this, that you can do this to a village in the Eastern Cape, just slightly north of Mthatha, but I don't think you could get away with doing this in Diepsloot or Soweto. I feel like the political consequences would be much harsher for Eskom. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, and I think it's also just a geographical issue. If you go cut off, a village that's 40 km from the nearest kind of city or whatever the case is, people aren't going to go. They're not going to be able to block roads and cause disruption in East London or Port Elizabeth or whatever the case is, because they're 100 km away. But if you do that in Diepsloot or Soweto, obviously, and there's lots more people work in the city, and it'll cause much more disruption, that kind of thing. But as you say, I think there's also a political issue. I think lots of people in our rural areas have been left behind by the government. They're still, if we look at the number of schools that still have used long drops or put latrines or whatever, it's actually shocking that there's still actually schools in South Africa in 2022 that have to do this. And that's not a, it's,
and they also tend to be concentrated in the Eastern Cape as well.
Exactly. I mean, you can see it if you look at a map of schools that have, like, say, pit latrines or whatever. You can see how it maps almost exactly to the old homelands, which is obviously that's a legacy of the past. But it's also, you can only blame it for so long. It has been now, apartheid has been dead for a generation now, literally. So I think it's time for the government to start taking some responsibility for what has been happening in South Africa. And as I think people in rural South Africa have been left behind by, not just the government, by a lot of people, in terms of, infrastructure, in terms of how they're treated by the law. We have lots of, lots of tribal authorities actually have more authority than the state in many ways. People fall under the authority of the chief rather than our kind of democratic system. It's definitely an issue for women to a large degree. So I think it's something that not just the government, but I think South Africa itself has to take a long, hard look at itself and look how we have treated people who live in rural South Africa, especially the old homelands, and a lot of them have been left behind by South Africa, and not just the state, but everybody actually.
Oh, very much so. All right, let's move north of the border now to talk about an election in one of Africa's most important countries, and this is, of course, Kenya, which has had a pretty dramatic and hotly contested election between Raila Odinga and William Ruto, who are currently vying for the the post of president. The votes happened on Tuesday, but the counting is still going ahead. Kenya counts their votes very slowly, it seems. And this is only the first round of potentially 2 rounds. In order to win election, you need to get 50% of the vote overall in the first round, or alternatively, and at the same time, you also have to win, I think, at least 25% of the. We need to get 25% of the vote in a certain number of counties, something like that. I can't remember exactly what the criteria is, but essentially it's a kind of thing to make sure that your representation is geographically spread. You can't just win from getting a huge number of votes in a very concentrated area. And that's presumably not just to hold the country together, but also to reduce the likelihood of cheating. And it's been quite dramatic because both these contenders, they're both high up in the political establishments of these two countries. Odinga was prime minister previously of Kenya. He's also been a long-time opposition leader, and Roodt is the current vice president. But what's been the most dramatic thing that's happened in this election is that the current president, Kenyatta, when he was preparing to step down, he endorsed Odinga, who's from the opposition, rather than his own vice president Roodt. And Roodt has declared this as a great betrayal by Kenyatta. So, yeah, shall we say quite hectic stuff. Marius, how's it looking so far in terms of the results?
It looks like Odinga is leading with about 70% of the vote counted. He's got about 51% of the votes. Ruto's got about 47, 48, and there's 2 other candidates from minor parties who don't have, they haven't even got to percent of the vote each yet. So it looks like Odinga is probably going to win. From the reports that are coming out, it seems that things are going pretty smoothly. It seems to be pretty peaceful. There hasn't been too many issues. And Kenya has obviously had quite a few issues since becoming a multi-party democracy in the 1990s. There was obviously an issue in 2007 and 8. There was basically a low-level civil war. Lots of unrest, people fighting.
At least 1,000 people were killed in that.
Exactly.
Conflict.
And then in the last election, the election actually had to be rerun. There was accusations of rigging, and the country Supreme Court actually said we have to have this election again. The results are still the same. Uhuru Kenyatta, he won re-election. So, but we'll have to see what happens. As you say, Kenya is a very important country. It's probably the third most, third most influential democracy in Africa after ourselves and Nigeria. And it's growing quite rapidly. It's kind of becoming Africa's Silicon Valley. And if you look on trends, it's not impossible that by 2030, 2035, the average Kenyan is going to be richer than the average South African, which is something to think about. But obviously, I mean, Kenya's, they're not, they've got some serious issues too, but they do seem to be putting in the right kind of policies. They do seem to be growing the economy. They don't have too much of this kind of left-wing rhetoric that you often get here in South Africa. And in many ways, I think we can look at the Kenyans. Obviously, I think they've got more serious problems when it comes to issues of ethnicity and so on. I think that's still quite a big problem in Kenya. I don't think it's such a problem in South Africa, but it is growing. It's something to look at.
One of the interesting things in this election is I believe neither of the presidential candidates is from the largest ethnic group.
The Leo and the Kikuyu, I think, are the 2 biggest ones. Yeah, and you're correct, John. They're both from, minorish. But Odinga is also, he's, kind of Kenyan royalty. His father was also involved in the struggle against colonial rule, but so was Uhuru Kenyatta's father. His father was actually the first president of independent Kenya. And something I mentioned just before to Nick and Sholan, to anybody who's listening, that Uhuru Kenyatta, the president of Kenya, his second cousin is Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine. And Sholan did not know Rage Against the Machine was, which really upset me.
Sholan, any thoughts before we close up for today and this week?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely need to up my, my music interest based on Marius' advice. I'll definitely be engaging in that. But yeah, I definitely think it's exciting as always to see an African democracy, actually have an election where, as far as I know, there hasn't been mass violence, things like that, or intimidation. That's always, it stirs that African patriotism inside of my soul, my guy. So that's always exciting to see. But I would also note that some of the articles and stuff I've been reading is that they have mentioned that there is quite a concern with regards to voter participation in Kenya. A similar thing that we're seeing in South Africa, especially with regards to the youth vote, which is undoubtedly the most important one for me. And I definitely think that, I know going on election day is important and casting that vote, but we should also remember that democracy, it doesn't end once you've casted your vote. Beyond that, in and out of election season, there's still a democracy that must be kept healthy and that must still be engaged with. And yeah, that's definitely something I hope to see improve. And I hope that civil society, with the political parties involved as well, will definitely keep that as a main focus when going to the next elections and trying to engage youth, for sure.
I definitely agree with that. I think that Kenya, if they can pull this election off properly, is well on its way to properly consolidating as a democracy. A step that South Africa, I think, is still only halfway down the road on. And this is yet another wake-up call that we need to sort of get with the times, and have a change of government, have a peaceful change of government, and keep running free and fair elections. Anyway, that's all I think we have to say today. That's all the time we have. So thank you very much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed the show. We hope that you found it interesting. Please subscribe to us. Please like the video. Please leave us good reviews on the podcast apps. And we will see you next week for the Daily Friends Show. With that, everyone, have a wonderful weekend. Cheers.